Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. And I feel like I always say this, but I'm excited, but maybe for a lot different reason. Today, we have two guests on our podcast, and these guests experienced our men's intensive that we held here in Spanish Fork, Utah. And the questions we often get is, hey, what's that all about? Why would I do that? I see value in it, but I'm still not sure what I would experience. So everybody experiences something different. And I wanted a couple people to be able to share with you what that's all about and what happened with them inside of that. As we jump into this podcast and talk about this, I want to let those people listening know that this intensive was an experience that these two gentlemen had. And the podcast wasn't created as like an ad to get people to attend the intensive. It's a podcast created to talk about one of the tools out there for healing. Welcome to Beyond the Facade podcast. I'm your host, Luke Gordon, and I'm thrilled to have you join me in this space today. What we're going to be doing is diving deep into the trials and triumphs and truths of seeking authenticity. Becoming your true self isn't about a single action or moment. It's a relentless pursuit, a commitment to self that reveals the rich connection and meaning that our life has to offer. So whether this is your first time tuning in or you're a regular listener, know this: what you're building here goes beyond a conversation. You're here to challenge, to change, and to celebrate the incredible journey of becoming your authentic self. Because when you dare to show up fully, the rewards are immeasurable. So welcome to Beyond the Facade. Let's get started. These two guys I respect a lot, and not because they came from an intensive experience, but I watch a lot of men go through the journey and I watch them tackle it. And it's sometimes proactive in approach and sometimes it's reactive in approach. Sometimes it's because somebody's telling them they have to do it or to maintain a relationship. And sometimes it's doing it because they're like, I can't do this anymore as far as the unhealthy mechanisms of life. And I see these guys here are tackling their recovery proactively. So more than just the, hey, what's an intensive all about and why did you do it? And what's it like? More of just you hearing about a couple guys that are proactive about their recovery and doing good stuff. I appreciate you both being here because I don't know, it's a podcast. So people are going to be listening and it's your story and your journey. So thank you very much for being here. First question I have for you is what were you experiencing in your journey when you decided to join? So what was going on in your life? What made you decide to do it? And whichever one of you want to go first.
Go ahead, Curtis. Yeah, for me, I've been in recovery for almost 2 years now. And I like the idea of the concept of unmasked. I've done a lot of individual work, a lot of group work, and I've realized that I split myself off into all these different masks in the way that I present myself to people, to the point where I wasn't even necessarily sure who I am, like what is the authentic me. And I've done some of that work, like I said, over the last 2 years, but I looked at the idea of an intensive as an opportunity to spend a few days digging a lot deeper than I could in an individual session to get to the bottom of some of the things that I've been working on and trying to figure out what authentic means to me, what it means to be vulnerable, what it means to connect to myself and to others in a real and honest way. And that's what led me to the point of the intensive.
What was that like for you making that type of decision? Was it like, I'm going to do it? Or was it a battle?
It wasn't a battle. I wanted to go so badly. I felt like it was this incredibly important thing for me to do. I had some concerns if I could make it work, time wise for work, financially, lots of other reasons. Then I also had it built up in my head as like, I needed this to be the thing that like cures me or solves all my problems. And I struggled with that for weeks leading up to the intensive. And I knew and I recognized that if I went in there with those types of expectations, I wouldn't be able to be as present and as honest and vulnerable and authentic as I wanted to be. So I did a lot of work beforehand trying to let go of that and just show up and let whatever happens in the intensive. And that's sort of the process I went through as far as making the decision to go.
Okay, that's awesome. What about you, Brandon?
At the point I went to the intensive, I'm just now coming up on a year since my D-Day. So I'm about halfway as far into this as Curtis is. But I knew there was a lot of work to be done on family of origin stuff and just getting real with myself, being willing and able to be vulnerable with other people. And I've been through a lot of different therapy and just different stuff that you're trying when you're trying to find a way to heal. And I knew there was always just something, quite frankly, about you, Luke, that I trust you. And I felt like if you were putting it on, it would be worth my time to be there. And I was right about that.
Okay, cool. Did you what were you hoping was going on in your life that could I'm not trying to load this, Brandon, to where there needed to have been something, but do you feel like there was something that you went into it going, "I hope that I can get this out of it," or was just more, I feel like this is just something I need to do"?
It was a combination of both. As soon as you mentioned it, I was like, yeah, I think I need to do that. And I started looking into it, the logistics and all that of actually getting the whole way across the country to be able to do it. But everything lined up. But I also, I just felt like I needed to be there, man. It's hard to explain.
Yeah.
I knew there was more digging, more peeling to be done. And, I've spent the first 43 years of my life just an absolute imposter. And some of the language that's in the materials that you sent out on it speaks directly to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd love for you guys to comment on this, but you have this experience where you go and your life gets disrupted through discovery or a disclosure, and your life blows up, and then you decide, okay, I need change. And then you have this really annoying process of, I don't know, doing groups or coaching therapy 1 hour at a time throughout a week. And it's like, can I do some heavy lifting and what can we get accomplished? And there is a lot of heavy lifting done in a very short period of time. I don't know. Can you guys comment on that? Any thoughts on that? Because that's just my perception.
Yeah, it seemed like a really efficient way to do work. Just having all day for 2.5 days. I'm all about efficiency and that the I definitely advanced more in that period of time than I would have had I not been there for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's lots of things that I have heard before an individual, those 50-minute, hour-long sessions via Zoom that I heard again in the intensive in person with other men in the room. It just resonated in a different way that I think you can't really, or I couldn't really get from a virtual room. Some things that I was like, I got it like in my head, but there's some things that I started to really understand about myself and about some of the concepts that we talk about in group and in sessions that I think being there in the space with people and hearing their stories and looking them in the eyes across the table and things like that, it's just, you can't really replicate some of that stuff virtually like we try to as much as we can, but it's different with people in the room with you.
So different. What did you go experience? That's such a vague, unfair question. And I'm not saying agenda like on Wednesday morning at there at 9 o'clock. And then I sat in my seat, but paint a picture of what did you experience? What happened? And any way you do it is great.
It revealed a lot to me about what's going on under the surface, behind the scenes. How do you end up so far into this thing? How do you get so far gone? And we talked about maladaptive coping mechanisms and childhood traumas and all the things that tend to lead to this. But it was just really powerful to be in the room and in the fight together and just bearing one another's burdens. And it was just a really great experience that the seven of us had that were there.
Okay. I want to come to Curtis.
It's just like a hard question.
I
What did
know.
I experience? How do I really even quantify some of the stuff in words? But I try not to oversell it, or undersell it. I just want to be like honest with how I feel about it. Like in some ways, I feel like it was I'm starting to get emotional, a life changing experience. For me, I'm kind of an emotional person as it is. I didn't really necessarily recognize that before recovery, but I mentioned earlier about some of the concepts and things that I like knew in my head. We talk a lot about parts work and things like that, and in the sessions, and just really, I gained a better understanding of who I am, how all the different parts of me connect, and a level of acknowledgement and appreciation for some of the parts that I have come accustomed to not liking or hating, to be honest. I feel like those 2.5 days made more progress than the previous 2 years, but I know that the 2 years before. I built a foundation on what happened
Mhm.
at the intensive, but I came away from it feeling more connected to myself than I've ever been, more of an understanding of where I've been, where I am now, where I want to go in the future. And I have more of a sense of sense of self. I feel more confident. There's still hard days in life. It still happens and it's not perfect, but it just, I don't know. I don't know how else to describe it. It was just
Yeah.
a unique experience for me.
Yeah, and I appreciate you acknowledging, like, how do I respond? Like, how do I frame up and paint a picture for you on that type of an experience? Something that I wanna highlight there that I thought was really beautiful was there were parts of me, and I recognize this, depending on the listener, might not make sense, me even saying there were parts of me, but there were aspects of me, things that I did that I hated. I didn't like that, and learn about IFS parts where we learn to understand that part and get to know that part. And it is transformational. And for those of you who don't know, for these men, and I'm not going to share parts of you guys' stories, that's not mine to share, but they had to do so much work to get to this point for it to be transformational. But it's not like I sent them for an intensive and can do that work. They were ready for that work. And it's very, I don't know, powerful. What about you, Brandon?
I think we spend a lot of time trying to help people that don't want to be helped. And I think for me, with my whole journey, I had to get to rock freaking bottom and then realize, okay, you're going to lose your marriage, you're going to lose your kids, you're going to lose your house, you're going to lose your entire life. And I was an absolute monster for a lot of years. I acted out virtually and in person more times than I care to talk about, but I came away from the intensive with a much kinder, forgiving view of myself. And I feel like I feel like I hadn't yet forgiven myself for the way that I lived my life for so many years. And that was huge because if you're beating yourself up all the time, it's really hard to do the rest of the work as far as healing goes. And the intensive is not going to be the be all end all. It's not going to be like 2.5 days later, you're fixed and you're good to go, but it's a piece of the puzzle and it's a big piece of the puzzle.
And okay, so I want to have that remain truth. And let's highlight that for a second. The fact of, okay, when I went in this intensive, I developed or put some energy into more of a compassionate mindset around myself because the kicking the crap out of myself didn't really give me the result that I was looking for. So we did something a little different and it was helpful. So I want to speak to, I don't know how many betrayed partners we have that listen to this, but Brandon, please talk about this part, which is I have a compassionate mindset for maybe a part of me that I hated. And a betrayed partner, if they would hear this, what about, do you feel like now you have less accountability because you're more compassionate, less holding myself to be more transparent? Did you let yourself off the hook with the compassion? Could you speak to that if I'm making any sense?
Yeah, it's not like I let myself off the hook. You can forgive somebody and there's still accountability. If you murder my child, I can forgive you, but you're still going to prison for the rest of your life. So that's how the compassion and accountability can work together. And it's a lot easier when you slip up, when you get off track, if you are able to forgive yourself to get back on track. It's very counterproductive to just be mad at yourself all the time or to hate yourself all the time. You have to have the regret. You have to have there's got to be shame there, obviously, because what we did is wrong. But just living under the weight of that is something that I definitely learned a lot about how to give up by going through the intensive.
Yeah. Yeah. Curtis, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, the idea of is it a lack of accountability? I personally think that I can't hold myself accountable if all I'm doing is beating myself up. If I am my actions and my behaviors, I can't hold myself accountable for it because I'm just trapped in shame. And I think part of this intensive, I've done a lot of work beforehand, but a lot of that is separating me from my actions and my behaviors. And when I do that and I can get some self compassion for who I am and who I've been and who I want to be and things like that, then I can look at the actual behaviors and the actions and start to figure out where I went wrong, what I can do. I can start to build things in place to really build a life that I want to have apart from those things. But if I'm constantly beating myself and not having a forgiving, compassionate attitude, I can't get there.
Mm, yeah, I like that. This is the question I have for y'all. What did you observe about other men that you were around doing this work? And then how did you see yourself differently watching them go through the hard work that they did during the intensive?
So you're talking about specifically other men in the intensive?
In the intensive, yep, side by side, watching them do their work, and go through that painful, painstaking yet rewarding work. What did you observe, and then how did it make you reflect about you?
I think it's interesting that when the first day started out, we did our check-ins, how we're feeling coming into it, like what brought us here and things like that. And I checked in some fear and some anxiety, some nervousness, and I feel being vulnerable and honest, but it was coming from a different place. And then as I hear other people talk, and as one person gets vulnerable, then another person feels comfortable to do it, and then we're all sharing. And then I can see things in other people about me that I couldn't necessarily see on my own. It's like looking in a mirror in some ways, with some other experiences that other men have had that maybe I'm less able to see on my own, but I hear someone else share it. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I've experienced. And there's a connection there that is unique and it breaks down those walls too and allows vulnerability and connection. I think I got a lot of that throughout other people talking and sharing and the different work that we did. And it allowed me to show up in a more authentic way as well.
Yeah, thank you. Brand?
Yeah, for me, there's just a lot of value in being in the same space as other men who are going through the same journey you are. It's not the exact same, it's not identical, but the underlying problems are very similar. And just seeing other guys being willing to be vulnerable and authentic, it gives everybody in the room permission to do the same. And that's where the work is done. That's where the progress is made. Some guys talked about some stuff that was very raw and real and emotional. And I was like, man, that's got to be really hard to talk about in a room full of strangers. It also allowed me to realize some things about myself while I was there. I've spent my entire life trying to not come across as emotional and sensitive. And I am very emotional and I am very sensitive and I don't care who knows because that's the way I was made. And it doesn't mean you can't still man up or act like a man or whatever, but I feel things to a greater extent than most people feel them. And my emotions go further and higher and wider than most people's emotions do. And I got really good at stuffing all that garbage down for a long time. And it boils over into the rest of your life and really ruins a lot of things. So just being there with those guys really just allowed me to explore who I really am, how I was really made, and just accept it.
Mm-hmm.
I like who I am.
That's so cool. The name of the intensive is Unmasked. So it's authentic experience. It's what is masculinity actually? Like, what is masculine? So can you guys speak to, and it doesn't need to be like before intensive, after intensive, but can you speak to what the world tells us about being a man looks like versus what you're experiencing in recovery? What being a man actually looks like when it comes to the masculine part?
I think for me, I don't know if it was necessarily that overtly taught as a kid, just watching how other people act and media and things like that. Men are supposed to be strong. They're supposed to be courageous. They're supposed to not feel pain, always be calm and cool under pressure and things like that. Always, in my mind, always have it together. And most of my life, I didn't leave any space for emotions, for feelings, for like uncertainty or not knowing the answer. Like I always felt I had to be perfect in a lot of ways. And I think coming out of the intensive, there's a quote that I like from a book. I talked about it in the intensive, but it talks about the idea of vulnerability. It's Brene Brown. She says, vulnerability isn't weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. And to me, that's a huge thing for me now, like masculinity or being a man, or what courage means, what strength means. Strength and courage for me now is like leaning into those emotions, leaning into that discomfort and pain, and then being vulnerable and sharing it. It's no longer for me trying to look strong and tough because that's not real. It's not who I am necessarily. So it's reframing, what does strength, what does courage look like? What does those types of things, what's true for me regarding that. And then I can show up in a way that's authentic for me, regardless of what I've, been brought up to believe or think.
Hmm. Love that. Brandon?
Yeah, there's a lot of power in realizing and confessing to yourself the fact that you are absolutely full of crap. And everything that you're showing to the world out there when you're not living authentically and you're not doing the work to recover and heal and all that, it's very anxiety inducing to talk about these things, especially in a format where the whole world could access this if they wanted to.
Yeah.
I get a lot of peace and strength from the realization that everybody that would judge me or belittle me or make fun of me or whatever, they're all full of crap too. So I really just don't care anymore. I want to live my life, and I want to live it in a way where I can be true to who I am and I don't care what anybody thinks.
Yeah. I remember both of you guys talking makes me think about the tremendous risks associated with challenging my belief system. And
Mm.
my belief system leads me to believe like what I was taught about being a man is that I show up differently than the model that was given to me. That will mean disconnection, it will mean rejection, and it will mean a very emasculating like experience of you're not accepted and something's wrong with you. And tearing down that structure, that belief system and showing up differently. And Brandon, I hear you talking about like I refuse to give space to and have people hold power over me that believe this. That's not something I want to feed. And it's a pretty amazing experience diving into showing up without all those things on and seeing what happens.
And going back to the concept of masculinity too, there's a lot of definitions for masculinity these days, and the overwhelming majority of them are garbage. I lived the masculine lifestyle that society and media would have everyone believe is the way that a real man lives. And you can do that if you want, but I'm here to tell you it's absolutely a miserable way to live your life.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. Like, I don't know. I'm not trying to be spiritual right now. I'm just trying to find a word that says I agree with you. I guess I could just say that. Yeah, that's what that word means. Curtis, any thoughts on that?
No, other than I completely agree as well. Like I said, part of that intensive was redefining what that means for me and everyone individually, and letting go of what all we've been taught or what society thinks is the appropriate, way to be a man.
Yeah. What message you want to share with guys around intensive or just in general that you feel would be something you want to share?
I would say if you think or have an inkling that maybe this would be a good idea, just do it. What's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to lose 2.5 days of your life and come back in the same situation you were before. But what could happen is you could get a whole bunch of healing, a whole bunch of tools to work with, a whole bunch of new strategies. The benefit far outweighs the risk. How about that?
Yeah. There is nothing different unless I actually do something different, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Curtis?
Yeah, I don't know. I think if I had done this a year ago, I would not have gotten anywhere near what I got out of it today. So, when I started recovery, I was trying really hard. I was, but I was still not letting go fully of the outcome. And I was checking the boxes a lot on things, making sure I'm going to group, I'm doing
Mhm.
this. And I didn't know what I didn't know. I just some things I couldn't let go of. And I think if I had went in that mindset of I'm just checking boxes, I wouldn't have gotten anything out of it, or what maybe not anything, but I wouldn't have had the experience that I had. So I think if anybody is thinking about going to this, if you're in a place where you're ready to let go, learn how to let go of the outcome, learn how to be vulnerable, learn how to connect to yourself in ways that you don't think are possible, and you're ready to stop just checking boxes. The intensive is exactly where to do that, in my opinion. And like I said earlier, this was an experience for me that I can't really fully describe, but I think I went to it at the exact time I was supposed to go to it. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity to go to that and to be able to share my experience with it today as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll back up and say, if you're thinking about doing it for somebody else, don't waste your time. If you're not ready to do it for yourself, you're just wasting your time and everybody else's time.
Thank you. Guys, thank you so much for coming today. I really respect what you guys are doing in your journey and your willingness to show up here. I don't know what it's I don't know what kind of feelings you're going to have. You're going to have a vulnerability hangover later. I don't know what you're going to have. Oh, Brandon, what do you think you're going to experience with this thing going out there and going out to everybody?
I don't tend to think things through. We'll see what happens, man. I'm not worried about it. Yeah, I'm a ready, fire, aim type of guy. So
Well, thank you for your willingness. Oh, by the way, I also noticed you're wearing your Utah shirt and you're
yeah,
not from Utah, right?
no, but when I was in Utah, I did not have a sweatshirt, and it's a lot cooler in Utah than it is in North Carolina this time of year.
Yeah, for sure. And you were sporting that today for the podcast?
No, ironically, I'm just on a camping trip with my family, and I grabbed the hoodie that was on top of the pile, and it was this one.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Serendipity.
That's just coincidence. Curtis, what's it going to be like for you, this going out there to people?
I'm good. Actually, I know before we started recording, you asked us how we were feeling, and I said I was feeling some nerves and anxiety this morning leading up to it. But I don't know. I'm happy with what I shared about my experience, and that's all I can do. So,
All right, guys. It was good to hang out with you. Everybody, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Hey, thanks for joining us today. If this is something that you connected with, I'd love to meet with you more and talk about it. So what you can do is go to chooserecoveryservices.com or check the show notes. And there, what we can do is set up a quick conversation to meet. Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Facade, where we unmask the authentic self.